Joining me now is celebrity lawyer Nick Freeman. Nick, thanks so much for your time. Great to have you here. Nick, how significant is this verdict? Of course, we're still waiting for sentencing. How significant is the verdict?
Well, it's hugely significant. It's been run in the public eye for quite a long time, and it sends a huge message out to victims of these terrible types of offences that actually they do have a voice, and I think that voice will be reflected ultimately in the sentence that Maxwell receives. So it is really an enormous conviction, not just because of her profile, but because of the way it's been run and because of the names that have been involved and the impact that it will have on future cases. So, that we're talking of an appeal, a possible appeal. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. It's extremely difficult to run a successful appeal. You've got to basically show that the judge erred in law or that the jurors were somehow behaved in an improper way, which will be very difficult. It's a very high burden. So, one can only wait and see. And of course, there are two more potential trials for perjury, each carrying a maximum sentence of 5 years. So there's an awful lot at play. But in terms of the significance of the conviction, it's as big as it gets.
And will that help indicate what kind of sentencing Ghislaine Maxwell can expect? Can we make any assumptions about what that sentence will be?
Yeah, I think first of all, the most serious offence is sex trafficking. That carries a maximum sentence of 40 years. She's looking at the moment at a maximum sentence of 65 years. And the judge, of course, will decide where this sentence falls, where these offences actually fall. She was acquitted of one; she's convicted of 5. The offences go back quite a long time. They're over a 10-year period. They involve serious sexual offences for minors, people under the age of consent, over a 10-year period. And the judge will reflect in her sentence the fact that these people have had to live with what's happened to them for a significant period of time, and they've had the courage to come forward and persisted despite obstacles in the way, such as, for example, potentially a deposition that was sworn by Maxwell in 2016 that contained lies, and that's the subject of 2 other charges. So the sentence, I think, will be at the top end. And it all depends how her lawyers want to play it. There's potentially 2 more trials. Is there any real benefit in running those, or will her lawyers want to speak to the prosecution? Because if one considers the names of people who are involved, and these are allegations in relation to other people, and it's very important to make that clear. There are allegations involving other people, but they are at the top end of the scale. They're very high profile. And Maxwell is the only person who knows where the bodies are buried, and she will be discussing with her lawyers what evidence she can give to the prosecution, whether that's a road that she wants to go down. Of course, at the moment she's considering an appeal, but one of the options open to her is how do I mitigate the situation I'm in, assuming that an appeal is going to be unsuccessful? And one way of doing that is by saying, in this country it's called turning Queen's evidence. Can I now become a prosecution witness and assist the Crown or the federal state in New York? And if I do that, what sort of deal can be done? Because ultimately, she needs to survive, and she wants to get out of prison before her life expires. And she is, of course, 60 years of age. So there are all sorts of avenues that are open to her, and one can wait and see as to which way she will go. But
Well, it's in short, it is she could potentially offer up names of who else was involved and incriminate other people.
Well, she'd have, yeah. She'd have to do more than offer up names. She'd have to actually give sworn evidence against those people. She'd have to provide evidence, not just sworn testimony, but she'd have to be prepared to go to court, give depositions, and bearing in mind she's now accused of lying in 2 depositions, so there's a credibility issue for her. But assuming she's prepared to do that, that is something that she has on her side if she's willing to go down that road. It's important to bear in mind at the moment she's denying the allegations. She's not showing any contrition because she says, I've done nothing wrong. And of course, the lack of contrition is ultimately a serious aggravating feature in this case, and it's something that the judge, if the appeal is unsuccessful, the judge will take into account that she's shown no remorse for what are very serious offences.
And one of the people that spent time with both Ghislaine Maxwell and the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein is, of course, Prince Andrew. How does this current ruling that Ghislaine Maxwell has been found guilty, how does this implicate him or impact him?
Well, I think it's important to bear in mind he was not on trial. There were no allegations against him at all. There was no suggestion of any impropriety against him at all during this trial. The only link in the trial that's taken place in Prince Andrew is the fact that it was conceded in this case that Maxwell's house was used in London for impropriety, but not in relation to Prince Andrew. So the Met may be under pressure to re-examine their case and re-examine whether or not their investigation, whether they wish to probe further. I doubt they will. There's no new evidence that's come to light. So I don't think from a criminal perspective there will be new allegations of a criminal nature against him in this country. It is important, of course, to bear in mind that there is currently there are civil proceedings against him in New York by Virginia Giuff. And the fact that Maxwell has been convicted will help that civil action against Prince Andrew. It will make his case more difficult. It will make her case stronger against him.
And we're talking about potentially spending, you mentioned some of those maximum sentences. Ghislaine Maxwell could spend a lot of time, potentially the rest of her life, behind bars. Excuse my ignorance in asking this, but what does that actually look like? Because, of course, people with money end up in very different facilities.
Well, she's got money and she's been in solitary confinement since July 2020. So her money certainly isn't helping her at the moment. She seems, if you believe what she says, and there's no reason to disbelieve it, she's suffering horrendous conditions where she is now. At some stage, when these proceedings are over, she will go to a different prison, in all probability. I doubt that she will have any privileges. She will just be treated as a normal person. Whether she needs to be in isolation or not, I don't know. I don't know whether that's something that the prison authorities will decide in relation to her own safety. But the sentence will be huge, and I imagine that it will be something that will take her beyond her life expectancy. So that there isn't a great deal, if things proceed as they currently look like they're going to proceed, to look forward to on her account. So, her mitigation, I imagine, will be, and of course, for her to mitigate, she's got to accept that she's done something wrong. At the moment, she doesn't accept that. But if the appeal process is exhausted and she ultimately accepts her culpability, she's then got to put forward why she became involved in this. And I imagine it will be her infatuation for Epstein, and that led her. She's an intelligent, very privileged woman from a wealthy background. How did she become involved in such a tawdry affair, involving such despicable deeds?
Nick, you mentioned that, of course, she's not showing any contrition now, but should she exhaust all of her options and should it come to this, she might, like you said, she might work with the court and the prosecution to give evidence or to give to testify against other people that were involved. Since the entire Jeffrey Epstein scandal has come to light, and since we've been having conversations about it, of course, there's been lots of people who have had ties with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell who have been seen at parties or at events with those individuals. Should Ghislaine Maxwell go down a certain road, or even now, without knowing where her team will take her or where she will go or how she will plead later on, do you imagine, Nick, that there are other people in positions of power and influence who might be somewhat worried about their own fate at this stage?
I imagine that at the moment there will be some very twitchy people about in high places. But of course, it was only Maxwell on trial. And so there have been no allegations against anybody else. And guilt by association by itself obviously doesn't incriminate or inculpate anybody. So we have high-profile names that have been on his island, have been on his plane. That doesn't in any way suggest guilt. And one needs to be very careful careful not to make any suggestions against these people that they've done anything wrong other than enjoy a ride on an airplane and go to a lovely island and be looked after very comfortably. I don't know, and you don't know, what has actually taken place on these islands, because this island or in other places, because all this trial was about was specific allegations involving 4 girls, and nobody else was actually mentioned as being involved. The trial wasn't about other people. It was just about Maxwell and her involvement with Epstein. So to answer your question, it's extremely likely that there are people who are extremely anxious and will remain anxious until this matter is eventually put to bed. And I don't think this is a matter that's going to die here. I think it's got legs. It's going to go on and on until justice comes about for these girls in relation to all the perpetrators of these evil acts. All the people, whether they be in high-profile people, high places or not, they will not rest. These girls will not rest until justice has eventually been completed. And they're on a journey, and that journey certainly is midstream. There's an awful long way to go.
Absolutely a long way to go. Should Ghislaine Maxwell, in your experience and estimation, and of course this is just guessing games at this stage, should Ghislaine Maxwell be worried for her safety at this stage? Of course, Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in prison before he could be brought to trial. But of course, there have been some wild conspiracy theories about that.
Well, I'm not going to get involved in conspiracy theories because they're nothing more than conspiracy theories, and I've got no basis for suggesting anything. All I can say is that from a legal perspective, when people go to prison for sexual offences, and those sexual offences involve children, then that there is a rule within the prison framework that those are people who need protection because other inmates find that behaviour extremely offensive. So often those people need protection. They need to be, in this country it's called, they go under the rule, they're kept isolated from other prisoners, or they're kept with prisoners of their own ilk and like, for their own safety. So to answer your question, putting aside the conspiracy theories, I anticipate she will have to be in a safe place, either in isolation or with other inmates who have similar convictions recorded against them.
Nick Freeman, thank you so much for your time.